Hello and welcome. My name is Suzanne Wagstaff, and I'm the Director of Alumni Networks and Regional Programs. I work for the Washington University Alumni Association. Before we begin today, I just want to explain the format. You will only hear and see me, Stephanie, and her presentation. Today's program will last about 50 minutes. We encourage you to interact by introducing yourself in the chat box. If you do so, please be sure to indicate your message to panelists and attendees so everyone can see where you're from and your name. We also encourage you to ask questions at any time. And to do that, just type a question in the Q&A chat box at any time during the talk. Following the presentation, we will try to get to as many questions as possible. This webinar is being recorded, and we will share it on the Washington University Alumni Association YouTube channel following the event. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Stephanie Malia Kraus is the owner and principal consultant of First Quarter Strategies, a senior advisor to Jobs for the Future. She staffs the Economic Wellbeing Work Group for the Youth Transition Funders Group and consults nationally on youth readiness and well-being. Through her work and writing, Stephanie relentlessly focused on what young people need to be ready for the world and what the world needs to be ready for them. Stephanie previously served as a senior fellow with the Corporation for a Skilled Workforce, the Forum for Youth Investment, and Students at the Center. In these roles, she designed and led initiatives focused on college and career readiness, credentials, reimagining public education, and economic justice. Stephanie directed the National Connecting Credentials campaign and co-directed the Readiness Project. Please join me in welcoming Stephanie Malia Kraus, a social work alum from the Brown School here at Washington University.
Thanks so much, Suzanne. And I'm going to ask you just in the chat if you can let me know if you can see and hear me. And if folks on the line can also let me know if you can see the presentation. Thank you, Suzanne. So I've got confirmation you can see and hear me. And let's see, Stuart, if you can pipe in from Sonoma, California, and tell me if you see a picture of the book, that would be terrific. And then we'll be off. I'll have my logistics taken care of. You know, it's so funny. I am delighted to be here, but I wish that we could be together somewhere in person, maybe in Sonoma, California. Thank you, Rebecca. I have been launching this book in a basement, and I never expected that I would do that. Luckily, I have a brother who was in journalism and radio, and he told me that the one thing that I should purchase is a microphone because there's no book tour outside of right here in pandemic life in the bottom of my house. So I'm grateful to be here. I'm so glad that we can be together. And I'm delighted to be able to bring you some of the insights that have really sort of gone with me as I have traveled from schoolhouse all the way up to White House. I've included a quote here from former Secretary Duncan, just to sort of start us by anchoring in the why of making it and hopefully connecting with you and why you signed on and agreed to share lunch together today. And that is that in the space between my household, which became a homeschool, the schoolhouse where I've been a teacher and a school leader, all the way through working with the federal administration and working nationally, I have spent time really looking and understanding the difference between what it means to go through and complete school and to satisfy the requirements and what actually kids need in order to be ready for adult life and life after high school and after college. And so I want to take you on that journey with me, but let me say just a couple of things about the book first. So making it was a 2-year journey writing after 8 years in the national space. And it was written as really a love letter back to the front lines for anybody who is raising or working with young people. And when I talk about young people, I'm actually thinking about folks all the way up to age 25. So it's really interesting that our lifetimes are lengthening with the right resources and supports. And it's very possible that kids today, if they have the right supports and opportunities, could live to be 100 as the rule. And so when I'm thinking about today's kids, I'm actually thinking about anybody in that first quarter of a possible 100-year life. So know that if you're thinking about picking up the book, which of course I hope you do, that there are certainly things that are helpful for folks who are in policy or research or academia, for staff and faculty on the line. And also it's written in the way I'm a working mom that busy educators, counselors, coaches, and teachers can find time to read it. So here's where we're going to be heading today. I want to sort of offer a picture of who today's kids even are and what is happening in the world. How is the present and future of learning and work changing? We've all experienced in different ways the real growing pains and adjustments of work and learning in pandemic life. And in some ways, they're emblematic of bigger changes that we've been anticipating and starting to feel. And some of the changes that happened this past year aren't going anywhere, and they'll continue to persist. So we'll look at today's kids, we'll look at the world, and then spend a bit of time exploring what exactly the research shows young people, college students included, need in order to go on to adult life and make it work for them. And then what we can do as the adults who are caring for them, supporting, raising, and working with them. I do want to offer sort of a caution here at the beginning. The book is called Making It. It's not taking it. It's not what young people need to thrive or flourish. So I just want to put up these boundaries really clearly. One of the things I've seen as a mom in the past year is the need to help my kids in both surviving and thriving at the same time. And this book kind of lives in the messy middle. The presumption here is the world is still unjust and unfair. And what do our kids need to make it in that kind of world, even as we are trying to make the world better for them and work with them to make the world better? In terms of moving forward with the presentation deck, there might be times where I take it down so we can just see each other, or I can imagine seeing you, but I will try, if you want to move away from a screen, to also read what is there in a way that's not redundant, but that allows you to get a screen break if you need it. So who are today's kids? Because this is a WashU event, I thought that we would start by looking at sort of your traditional college age students and understanding that young people today are really both disruption and digital natives. And I put together this timeline to try and help us understand or bracket that. So for a young person who is, 20, give or take a year or two, they came into the world, they were born right around 9/11. This is the war on terror. This is, Iraq. This is a time of real fear and anticipation. An unbelievably difficult time for young people who were connected in any way. I'm from New Jersey, so certainly folks in the Northeast, because of proximity, but also thinking about young people who are Muslim, Hindu, Sikh, what it was like if you were a young boy, a young brown boy who was born during that time, how life would have been for you if you were a part of a military family. So the start of life for our traditional college-aged young people was disruptive and was in crisis. And then right around the time they're about to start kindergarten, we have the Great Recession in Wall Street. And so the beginning of school has this direct economic impact for so many young people as they're getting their start in the K-12 system, and how many of those families were struggling economically and the time that it was in our country. And now here they are all these years later, about to graduate or thinking about what's next, that first job, and it's COVID. And you really have this kind of confluence of three pandemics. You have this health crisis, you have the resulting economic crisis, and then you have the racial uprisings. You have this centuries-old pandemic, and all of it coming to a head at once. And so what is really important to understand, you'll see my two kiddos here, is that while we as adults likely remember years without big, life-changing global and domestic crises, this has literally formed who these kids are. And what we know about the brain science is that it has also changed their wiring. So what they want in life, how they experience life, how they process life goes through this funnel of big milestones being anchored in disruption. So I pulled up these two pictures of my kids. Harrison is on the left-hand side, and then you have Justice and Harrison on the right. My husband and I met at WashU, so these are little baby bears. And this very cute, toothless 7-year-old at the time is standing next to his Student of the Week poster, but there's no school. On Friday in March, it was his birthday and he was supposed to go to school. And then we got the message that nobody was coming back and that all of their things were in black garbage bags outside of the school. And maybe we would be back in school that spring, maybe not. And that was the last time Harrison was ever in a school building. And so, you know, you think about what is the impact for how he's going to experience all of the things as a result of that. Justice and Harrison on the other picture they've got a bunch of screens. They're actually sitting just where I'm speaking to you from. So they have all of my equipment for work and then some other devices. And I show that because really because of this next slide here, that their experience with technology is really at the level of being a true fluent native. So in 2007, not only was the Great Recession starting, but that was when the iPhone and other smart technologies got on the market. Both boys, I probably would change it now, but their births were announced on Facebook. And so their little digital footprint and story actually start before they're even born. And so if you are not looking at the screen, there's this comparison table that comes directly out of the book, Making It. And it just shows the differences in technology between how I grew up, and I think many people on the line grew up. And then on the other side, what the kids are experiencing. So I'll give two examples. You know, we grew up with landlines, our kids have smartphones and smartwatches. We grew up with folded notes passed in class, and our kids have Snapchat. Their data is owned by companies, and we don't even know the ways in which that data could be used moving forward. So that is who our kids are. We need to understand that this is the only world that they know, that the overload, the overwhelm that we feel is life as normal. From an equity and a diversity perspective, when we think about particularly the really horrible and accelerated anti-Blackness sentiment in the last year and the racial uprisings of the past year. What we also know about this group is, back to the pictures of my 8 and 10-year-old, that their classes in school are the first to be majority minority. And for a lot of kids, their backgrounds are are mixed. My boys are Native Hawaiian, we're Indigenous and Jewish. And we join a number of kids and families that are multi-ethnic. And so the need to experience belonging and radical inclusion is really paramount. So we're going to turn over to what's happening in the world. And what I would encourage, I see somebody has already added it in, is that as I'm going through this kind of tour de force, and we'll be doing this for probably the next 10 to 15 minutes, I would love if you threw questions or comments, and then we'll take a look at them when we open up at 12:35 Central. So here are these changing kids. You know, they are increasingly diverse. They are these disruption and digital natives. They're being wired by their experience and their environments. And what we know is that what's happening inside of them is somewhat reflective of what's happening outside. So I'll say this, particularly for parents and folks who are raising kids who are on this call. At the end of the book, I went back to the introduction, and if you get a copy of the book, you'll read this. And I said how scared I am about the mental health of our kids right now, and how overwhelmed and stressed and stretched they are. And I felt that way before the pandemic, and I feel it even more strongly now after. And the deep impact that all of this volatility and change has on them, has on our communities, and has on our houses, and that really does have an impact on who they are. So there's a much deeper treatment in the book in terms of the brain science behind this, and other things that we should know and be thinking about. In terms of the world, this was the piece that we don't get educated on as educators and counselors and parents. This was the part I really wanted to get back into the hands of folks on the front lines with young people. And so to go through really quickly, if you can't see the slide, there are sort of these three forces that I talk about in the book that deeply impact the world and how we work and how we learn and how we live. And those are machines, so technology; momentum, just how fast everything is happening; and markets, how the actual college, university world and working world are changing. So I'm going to give these pretty light treatment because we feel them and we experience them every day. But the headlines here are that technology is here to stay, that the robots have in fact come for some jobs. They're taking some jobs, they're creating other ones, that technology can be in the background and really powerful, like big data and digital platforms that let us buy things from Amazon and Etsy and get on social media. But it can also actually be like the robots that we see in Pixar and Disney movies. I talk in the book about these nurse bots in Japan. Japan has a growing elderly population, but their young population is getting smaller and smaller. And so they have come up with these social companion robots, and that's really a thing. So the big takeaway here is that we have to understand the role of technology. We need to understand that our kids are going to be in a tech touch relationship no matter what. And I give some strategies in terms of what that means. They'll need to work with technology. They'll need to work, alongside technology. And in some cases, they may be working for technology. I think that in tomorrow's world, in terms of work, we'll have less white collar and blue collar and more sort of resilient jobs to technology and change, and less resilient jobs to technology and change. Momentum is the speed, how rapid change is happening. Things are actually changing faster. Even inventions, innovations, by the time they get to market, sometimes are already outdated. So that's something for us to pay attention to. And then markets, I'm actually going to walk us to the next slide, because this really became the crux of what really was that kind of watershed moment for writing Making It, which is that our school system is designed on this factory industrial market model, and it's super inequitable. It always has been, but at this point it's just like totally outdated. And so basically most of us have experienced hearing this, feeling this, having this told to us, but the US kind of social contract of how you're supposed to make it in the world has historically been: you go all the way through school, you get your high school diploma, get into ideally a 4-year college or 2-year college and apprenticeship program. You go through it, and it's, who do you want to be when you grow up? You graduate, you get a job in that field or near that field, and then you keep getting better work, better pay, and eventually you retire, hopefully with some savings that you can give to your kids. And what we know is that never worked for everyone. But what's happening now is that works for very few, rarely anyone. And so the way that the world actually works, and for those of you who are not looking at the visual, there's a new slide here, and there's a marketplace in the picture, if you can see it, is that in adulthood, and we've experienced this ourselves, we move into this really confusing, chaotic opportunity marketplace. And the way that you get opportunity in America is actually by paying for it. It has a cost. And so the currencies that young people need to purchase learning and work opportunities, I've been able to identify through my work and conversations in the field and research for, and I'm hoping that they resonate with you. And feel free to use the chat to comment. Stuart, thanks for commenting in terms of who the contract works for. So these 4 currencies are competencies, so what you can do skill-wise, connections, who you know, cash, what you actually have to pay in dollars and cents, and then credentials. They still matter. Employers still value them. There are some employers who are not looking for them, but overwhelmingly employers want to see a credential. And so the true picture of what young people need varies. So you'll see, if you're looking at the visual, I use this chart to show that, like, there's variation in how much everybody needs of each. So if you're highly skilled and you know the right people for what you want to do, it might be less important that you have cash or a particular credential, because you know the people that will help you get the opportunity and you can make your way. On the other end, if you're extremely wealthy, you might be able to get by on opportunities without actually having the grit and skill that you need. And so it's super variable, but what's important is each of these currencies, again, competencies, connections, cash, and credentials can be inherited, learned, or earned. So we're going to take the next 5 minutes to go through and just give a very high overview of each of the currencies. Again, if you've got questions as you're listening, put them in the Q&A or put them in the chat. I've got the chat pulled up so I can see it. You're going to see cute pictures of my kids if you're looking at the visuals again, just to sort of remind you. And then in the book, each currency, you get sort of the science and the research behind it, and then also very specific strategies of what you can be doing to help young people, whether you're raising them or working with them or both, to really build these pieces. Now, I put in cute pictures of my kids who are young. That does not mean that the book is only for young children. It really definitely has a sort of universal theme of young people and across ages and stages of life. So in terms of the competencies, super quick, this is the things as parents that we don't pay attention to really if they're going well, but we know the moment they are not going well. So these are things like the ability to focus or to be organized, staying healthy, being reflective, getting through struggle, being creative and critical thinkers. I think the big takeaway here for me, especially as a parent and an educator and a social worker, is that we have these body systems that we take our kids to the doctor for and we're tuned into, and they're highly interdependent. I think it's fair to say we all know that if your heart rate goes up, that so does your breathing, that if I'm nervous and I haven't eaten food because of the speaking engagement, it's going to impact my other body systems. We have these other ways of being and doing that are less visible. And they're things like focus and organization and relating to each other and emotional cognitive health. And they're as interdependent. If I can't get focused because there's so much stress in my life and my health is impacted, it's unlikely I can really think critically and creatively. So we need to tend to these ways of being and doing in the world and really nurture them. I have a picture here of my son in the middle of pandemic life, and he created these like Jimmy Fallon night shows, and it was JK News, and he was doing these episodes as a way of processing the pandemic, but also engaging all of these ways of being and doing through a project that he was doing that was at home and a part of school. In terms of connections, I actually think, maybe the most important currency. So I like to think about it as there's the relationships we need to be socially healthy, and then there's the relationships we need to be socially wealthy. And it's gonna depend. So the picture here is my kids and my godkids, and pre-pandemic life, they live together in the summer and we raise them as one crew. And the kinds of relationships that each of them need is different depending on what stage of life they're at, what they're going through, what they're needing, but they all need together and they all serve for each other as lifelines, those people who are just doing life with you. There are these other two relationships that really have to do with social capital, and those are navigators, so people who are sort of in a similar position, but have been around a little bit longer, near peers, and then door openers, the folks who open up opportunities. And these can be programs or people. So that gives you a sense of competencies and connections as currencies. And then the next are credentials and cash. So I have a picture here, if you're not looking at the visual, of myself and three of my four brothers. There are five of us. My older brother, who's on the far right, Jamie, and I both dropped out of school. Jamie never got a GED. I got a GED, started at community college and ended at WashU in graduate school. But we go from dropout to the kiddo in the middle is my baby brother, and he went to Harvard. And I put up that picture just to show the variance. The brother next to me dropped out of college and now is back as an adult student. There are hundreds of thousands of credentials, and our pathway to getting them is super varied. So big things that you need to know. If you've got young people in your life, you should be thinking about, what do I need now and what do I need next? And that it's not one and done. If they're going to live a 100-year life, potentially, that could be an 80-year working life in a time of rapid change. They're going to have to keep going back for some kind of credential, whether it's a degree or a certificate, to update and upgrade what they know and can do. And so our posture toward credentialing should be, it's still important. Generally, people make more money and are more employable if they have credentials. There are hundreds of thousands of options. Some are wonderful, some are terrible, most are too expensive. And the now, next, not one and done principle is very important. We could do a whole nother lunch conversation on what the life path has looked like of these siblings with these varying credentials. And then cash, you'll see my little robbers. stealing all the money. I didn't know what kind of picture to do for cash, but we don't talk about it enough. And it's just so important. But some things that are sort of a little controversial and new is that we're living in this time of scarcity and crisis. So not only is cash important because life is actually very expensive, not only are some kids well ahead because they're born with wealth, social wealth and financial wealth, while others are not, but kids actually should be prepared for times of financial scarcity, that the financial model is not really retirement investment anymore. They need to know about saving and spending, debt and what to do with it, who to go to when they need money, that across income brackets right now, every single income bracket, there are families who are struggling financially, and that kids are going to need to keep moving forward even during times of financial struggle. So that is a rapid tour de force of the currencies. But in the book, each section has these very specific kind of practices and recommendations for what you can be talking about with young people. And what you can be doing with them, whether that's at home or in your classroom or in your program, wherever you're engaging with them. So the book ends, and I'm going to end before we open up for Q&A with, okay, so what does that all mean? What actually do we need to be doing to make sure that young people are okay? And so again, looking at the research and looking at experience and talking to folks all across the country, I was able to surface these 5 characteristics of what it looks like if we ourselves as adults become currency builders in the lives of the young people who we are working with and spending time with. And so recognizing again that not everybody will be on the visual, I'm going to just name these, but as with the currencies, say they really are sort of a set. And we just need to understand that they go together, and they truly are, sort of, here's my disclosure here. I am trying myself as a parent, as a godparent, to put these into practice all of the time. And the thing that I think has been most helpful for me is moving from this sort of idea of I've got to get my kid through 5th grade or into college or into career, to this calculus of what does it mean to have a long and livable life? And is this decision going to support that? Is it going to help that happen or hurt it or hinder my kid? And that's really become the calculus. Is this helpful or is this harmful? And is this helpful in support of a long and a livable life? So the 5 characteristics here, very briefly, taking a whole person, whole life approach means that to build currencies, we need to think about not just one facet of a kid, not just their academic achievement or their mental health or their physical health or their relationships, but that sort of full 360. So what are the circumstances happening in the context? And then how am I thinking about longevity and livability? So that long-term whole life piece. Building currencies wherever and whenever go together. And we saw this during pandemic time. And really the idea here is learning happens whenever it happens, and it should always count. And our households can become homeschools, and school buildings are more than education. We saw that this year, how much more they provide. So really thinking about kind of the full ecosystem that surrounds young people and how partnerships happen is really important, whether that's individual partnerships between teachers and parents or bigger community level partnerships. And then the final 2 go together as well, which is to be just, inclusive, and caring, and an advocate and ally. We will not be able to provide everything that young people need, but we can certainly ask for it and demand it of those who are decision makers. And so those are the currency builder strategies that line up with the research that can guide our decisions in terms of how we are supporting young people, whether they are in university or like mine, elementary school, or even a 25-year-old who doesn't really know what's next and isn't quite feeling fully adult yet. So I want to pause here and invite questions. I do have some that folks were able to submit in advance of the conversation, but I wonder if we can take just a minute and I'm going to turn it over to the Q&A and chat. If you have a question or something that you want to talk more about, let's take a minute to do two things. I'm putting up on the screen how you can get in touch with me. And so if you want to grab that information, but if you do have a question or a comment, if you can add it into the chat, and we'll just pause for 30, 45 seconds. So you can do those things, and then we'll shift in here. So again, if you're wondering why we're paused, if you had to take care of something, we're taking just 30 seconds. If you have a question that you want to add in the Q&A on the Zoom or in the chat, just make sure it's coming to panelists and attendees. This is your time. And then if you wanted to grab information on me, I'm going to stop sharing the screen here in a second so that we can have what feels like more of a conversation, not a presentation. Okay, let's see. So we've got a couple of questions coming in. I'm going to stop the share and we're going to jump into questions. I will repeat the questions that I'm seeing and hearing. So, okay, so let's go first with Elizabeth, your question around specific ways on how you address the whole person. So when we think about the research and the practical realities of a whole person, I think you want to think about different facets of health. It's the easiest way that I think about it as a mom. And I actually do literally think about this as a mom. So the first is physical health, are they okay? Are they sick? Are they healthy? Are they getting the nutrition? All the things that we actually are pretty knowledgeable about, thanks to pediatricians and just where priority goes. But then there's cognitive and mental health. I would say this is the number one that I'm worried about. Number one I'm worried about as a mom. Number one that I'm worried about as an educator and social worker. And this is, really checking in on, so we've got the body and then we've got the brain. What does the brain health look like? Is there an issue that requires a specialist? We are in our family do use therapy. Is there supplements or medication that's needed? What is needed to protect the cognitive health of young people? The number one thing here is actually the need to be able to unplug or plug in at will. Everything is so overwhelming and so overloading, both tech and information, that our kids need the chance to be able to shut off and slow down. The hacks here are actually like sleep, eating right. They really connect with physical health, but time offline is really key. Social emotional health are the other two. And then cultural health, identity. Do our young people really know who they are, where they come from, why they are the way they are? So you've got physical, cognitive and mental, social and emotional, and then cultural. And I think with cultural, you also have sort of the extra layers around race, gender, ethnicity, other parts of identity that can be evolving. So from a strategy perspective, I would encourage you to look at what are all the things that you do to make sure that your child is eating well, getting those checkups, all the things you do physically, and then try to mirror it for cognitive and mental health, social emotional health. What are the checkups, the check-ins? What are the supports or services that are needed? And then culturally as well. So, and you can tell me if that answered your question or not. Okay, so next question here would be, so this is on the Q&A and I'm reading in real time, so I apologize. There's a question around how can you what are suggestions for action to help kids make connection? And so this is really important. There are some young people who have connections when they're born, they inherit them social capital wise, and then there are some who don't. So I have a friend who wrote a book called Who You Know, that really, her name's Julia Freeland Fisher, and she goes into deep detail in terms of how do you build social capital. Another researcher who writes a lot about this, who does a lot of work actually with WashU, his name is Richard Reeves, and he's at the Brookings Institution. And he talks about, we all know the glass ceiling, but there's sort of the glass floor. There are some social opportunities that are simply inaccessible for young people who are born without those connections. So the question though is like, how do you build them? And I would say that there is a really important role, number one, for the places that work with young people, schools, camps, youth programs, faith communities, and other systems that serve youth, to first start by recognizing what happens in their school that builds these connections. A really good example would be arts and athletics. And when financial decisions are being made, those are the things that are being cut. And so there has to be some knowledge building on the value of social capital in being able to do well moving forward, and then where and how those relationships are actually already being built. So I think there's a big role for programs and for systems to be deliberately designing to build young people's social networks, to expose them to new environments, to nurture relationships. Here in the St. Louis community, we have great examples like Big Brothers Big Sisters and others who've always sort of understood the value of both relationship and what it can provide. So being able to sort of get outside of that network and meet new and different kinds of people is important. I worry in the pandemic about what happens, particularly for juniors and seniors who just got cut off from all of these scholarship opportunities or athletics and arts, and they're losing out on sort of meeting the right people. Other things that we can think about are things, the relationship between cash and connections. So how much of that actually is very expensive to participate in arts, to participate in different programs, elite athletics, to take an unpaid internship, and the need to make sure that these are financially available for young people who might not have the family member or the family friend who can help give them an opportunity. So looking back to questions here, how do you motivate? So I'm looking at Lisa's question here. How do you motivate kiddos who feel so overwhelmed by the negative news about their future with global warming? Oh my gosh, Lisa, we are in that with my boys right now. So I'm going to tell you what I did. And I don't know if it's right or wrong, but back to these currency builder characteristics, I'm trying to actually cultivate those in my kid. So my boys are really increasingly terrified about extreme weather. We've had some close calls with tornadoes close to our house, and have family in California and Florida and other places that have been hard hit. And so what I've been doing is we took on a changing climate change, extreme weather as a project this past year. And I had them reach out to a local organization. And so the big piece for me is actually how can they find their own voice, and is this an issue that they want to take on? So every Christmas we choose organizations to donate to. And this year my son chose a climate change organization. So he's contributing money. He's learning what it means to be an advocate and what he can do, including going around and unplugging all of our devices and turning off lights sometimes on us so that we're not energy vampires, but at least like giving him some sense of agency. And then sometimes we just turn off the news and actually have to be super vigilant about it because they feel it and it's really overwhelming and scaring. So some is like moderation around information obesity, and then trying to really create space for them to have agency and action. So it just doesn't feel like this is only happening to them, but it's something they can be contributing to in the solution. And then every once in a while, just powering off and shutting down and taking a break if you can. So I think maybe we have time for one or two more. So Stuart, let me see what your question is here. It seems the digital realm younger people are growing up in can be relatively race, ethnicity, and gender neutral. Do you agree? If so, what benefits would this neutrality offer? So this is interesting. I think there are some, so there's the sort of online world of video games and online communities. I don't think we ever get to a place of neutrality because of the different experiences, even with language and how folks approach conversations or relationships that can still come up. So, you know, if someone is demeaning or discriminating, and even if they don't know, let's say against Indigenous people, and they don't know that I've got my avatar, that I'm an Indigenous person myself, they might not realize, but I'm still feeling hurt and experiencing that. You might think about the same thing with violence or whatever else. So what I think is really compelling to watch for is the chance in these more homogenous communities for young people to be engaging virtually in different kinds of communities and with different people that never would have been possible if they were only in their small town and they weren't able to connect. Now that brings up issues around digital access and connection. I'm a big believer that broadband should be viewed as a utility and not a commodity. And there are some kids who just aren't connected. But I do think that that is really powerful. In terms of gender neutrality, I think that gender neutrality, but what we do have is the spread of powerful ideas because of social media and exposure and movement building. I talk about hashtags in the book, hashtag movements that spread ideas, whether it's, you know, including the use of your pronouns before you speak. You know, I should have and could have said I'm Stephanie Krause and my pronouns are she, her, hers. And that familiarity with that even really came through online mediums. So what I do think is that the digital realm that young people are growing up in can offer exposures and experience to folks who are different than they are, and that in the best form, that can help to cultivate empathy and understanding and just increase that exposure to community. And that there are still some long-standing problems that probably are going to show up. So let me see, I'm going over to STEM education to Robin, and your question, Robin, and we're going to take this as our last question. I hope it's a good one, Robin. Are you a proponent of increasing access to STEM education to address the problems of inequitable access and outcomes? Can the who you know have an even greater consequence than the what you know, even when you have these credentials? And how can we as a society think, okay, you've got a lot of questions. How can we think as a society about balancing to accommodate currencies less accessible to disadvantaged communities? God, I wish we had time to answer all of these. So access to STEM education. So if you don't know STEM, there's STEM in STEAM. It's science, technology, engineering, sometimes art and math. And I would say, yes, access to really good STEM or STEAM education is important for a couple of reasons. One is in a workplace that is increasingly reliant on tech and experiencing acceleration, it's really important. Those STEAM careers are very vital. In terms of what I talked about earlier, like resilient jobs or durable jobs and less durable jobs, the basic operating principle here is a job that is durable is also not predictable or patterned. And because that's what makes us human. And so the ability for young people to learn how to be scientists, engineers, mathematicians, artists, craftsmen, and then to have the knowledge and skills to discover new things or to adjust and alter and work with technology. I think that's the sweet spot. The other thing that I love about STEAM is that it's often project-based and experiential, which is just good learning. And you can really work on those other competencies like focus and organization and relationships with other people, and becoming a lifetime learner through these STEAM projects. And I say that as like a house that's very much obsessed with Legos right now. I think that who you know is of greatest consequence, and that often degrees are actually pedigree. Right. So like I graduated from WashU graduate school, and it's the #1 school in the world, or at least it was for social work. And I know for a fact that it's name and brand recognition that has really given me opportunities and places at the table. No one has ever asked what the actual like academic training was that I got in the social work school. It's the fact that I went to WashU, and then that I married somebody at WashU. We must be such a smart family. We must be so successful. So that pedigree and brand is hugely important. And it's not fair in terms of opportunity distribution to those less advantaged communities or kids with fewer opportunities. But similar to what I shared earlier about building connections, it starts with even recognizing there's a problem and the way in which these things take place. So I'm going to turn it back over to Suzanne, but first I want to thank you tremendously. It is, my little baby bears on the screen. I was a full scholarship recipient to WashU, and so was my husband. And we are so grateful for the university and really proud to be a part of the alumni community. So I have to say, this is one of the things I was most looking forward to of all of the basement book launch activities, was getting to spend time with fellow alums and parents of current students. And I know Suzanne will share more about the book, but I really hope that you pick it up and then you enter into conversation with me. And in fact, Suzanne, if you're okay with it, while you're doing the closing remarks, I might open back up that slide that has the information.
Sure, go right ahead. And Stephanie, I want to thank you. This was really fascinating, and I hope our audience found this to be very helpful and informative. And I do want to remind anyone that if you purchased Stephanie's book, Making It What Today's Kids Need for Tomorrow's World, and you want a personalized signed book plate from Stephanie, we're going to be sending her email address in the survey that you will get following this event. So if you want to send a copy of your receipt to info@StephanieMaliaKraus, one word, .com. So she will send you a personalized book plate. So watch for that in the survey. Also, I just want to thank everyone for joining us. We look forward to seeing you all again for future programs. Visit the link in the chat to view the calendar of upcoming events. And thank you all so much for joining us. Have a great day.